Welcome to History Love. This is Anglo-Saxon England. Early settlements and social structure. The arrival of the invaders. Germanic migrations and the role of mercenaries. While Germanic foederati, who were allies of the Roman and post-Roman authorities, had settled in Britain during the 4th century, it was in the 5th century that large-scale tribal migrations occurred. The first wave of settlers, according to the 6th century writer Gildas, were invited by the Britons to defend their kingdom against the invading Picts and Scots. The Angles, Saxons and Jutes, groups from the Cimbric Peninsula, modern Denmark and northern Germany, were identified by the historian Bede as the primary tribes involved in this migration. Archaeological evidence and settlement patterns. Archaeology suggests that the early Germanic settlements in Britain were more complex, with Franks likely leading the first waves and Frisians involved in later migrations. Initial settlements were concentrated along the coasts and river valleys, particularly in the southeast. The Saxon shore forts built by the Romans also likely served as bases for the newcomers. However, a native British resistance led by figures like Ambrosius Aurelianus and the legendary Arthur temporarily halted the Germanic expansion, culminating in a decisive victory at the Battle of Mons Badonicus around 500 CE. Despite this, the Germanic invaders launched a renewed drive around 550 CE, pushing the Britons westward into modern Cornwall, Devon, and the Welsh Marches. The fate of the Britons. The fate of the native British population remains debated. Evidence such as place names and personal names suggests that the Britons did not disappear entirely. However, linguistic evidence points to a shift toward Old English and a reduction in Romano-British terms. By the end of the 7th century, the people of England had come to identify as part of the nation of the English, with a growing sense of unity under powerful rulers called Bretwaldas, overlords. The Bretwaldas and the rise of Anglo-Saxon kingship. The first Bretwalda was Earl of Sussex in the late 5th century. This overlordship was later held by Ceawlin of Wessex, 593 CE, and Aethelbert of Kent, 597 CE. Aethelbert was notable for his conversion to Christianity, and his kingdom was the first to receive a Christian mission led by the monk Augustine of Canterbury. Christianity played a significant role in unifying the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, and by 669 CE, the Church in England recognized a single spiritual leader. Social structure in Anglo-Saxon England. Kinship and social hierarchy. The kinship system was the central social bond in Anglo-Saxon England. A freeman's status was often tied to his kindred, who provided protection and support. The social classes were distinguished by the wergild, blood price, paid to a man's kin in place of vengeance if he was killed. The ceorl, common freeman, was the basic unit of society, often a small-scale landowner and farmer. The nobles had much higher wergilds, reflecting their elevated status. Many nobles rose through service as companions of the king, gaining status and land. Both nobles and ceorls could own slaves, who had no wergild and were treated as property. Below the freemen were those of lower status, including freedmen or subject populations in various regions. Kingship and the role of the witan. The role of the king was central to the governance of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Kings were seen as the earthly rulers, often with a sacred or divine mandate, and were distinguished by their coronation and anointment after the introduction of Christianity. Kings had special rights, including receiving compensations for offenses committed against them, their hospitality rights, and the ability to exact tribute from their subjects. They could also grant land in return for loyalty and service. A key council for the king was the Witan, Council of Wise Men, which advised the king on matters of governance, including the establishment of laws. Aethelbert of Kent is remembered for creating one of the earliest written codes of laws, reflecting both the old Germanic legal traditions and Christian influence. The development of Anglo-Saxon law and society. Evolution of law and administration. The Anglo-Saxon legal system evolved over time to accommodate the changing needs of a growing and more complex society. Initially, local variations in law were common, and as kingdoms expanded, the need for more formal administration grew. Two key developments were ealdormen. As kingdoms grew larger, an official known as the ealdorman was introduced to oversee the administration of specific regions. Sheriff. Later, the sheriff became responsible for maintaining royal rights within each shire. Christian influence on law. The acceptance of Christianity brought with it the need to integrate the clergy into the legal system. This meant assigning compensation for offenses involving the clergy, as well as creating laws to punish sacrilege, heathen practices, and breaches of marriage law. However, the basic principles of law largely remained unchanged, reflecting the strong Germanic traditions of compensation, kinship, and reparation. The rise of villages and towns. The Middle Saxon Shuffle. During the 7th and 8th centuries, many early Anglo-Saxon villages were abandoned or relocated in a phenomenon known as the Middle Saxon Shuffle. New villages emerged, and many of these evolved into the medieval villages of later centuries. Place names ending in ham and ingham were some of the earliest, often associated with old settlements. Contrary to previous beliefs, names ending in ingas, which were thought to be the oldest, were not the earliest types. Trading towns and urban development. In addition to the rural landscape, trading towns also emerged, often named with the suffix which, derived from the Latin vicus, meaning village. These towns grew particularly during the Middle Saxon period and later expanded as defensive settlements during the reign of Alfred the Great and in response to the Viking invasions. Conversion to Christianity and its impact. Early Christian missions. The conversion of the Anglo-Saxons to Christianity began in earnest in the 7th century and played a significant role in shaping the social and political landscape of the time. Key milestones include Kent, the first kingdom to accept Christianity, largely due to the mission of Augustine of Canterbury in 597. Essex, initially converted but reverted to heathenism by 616. Northumbria. Conversion began with King Edwin in 627, but faced setbacks with his death in 632. The mission was later revived by King Oswald and Celtic missionaries from Iona. East Anglia. Converted by Felix, sent by Archbishop Honorius of Canterbury, around 630. West Saxons. Converted by Birinus, sent from Rome. The spread of Christianity was initially led by the Celtic Church, which maintained connections with Rome but had its own practices. However, the Celtic Church soon faced challenges from the more centralized Roman Church. The Synod of Whitby, 664. The Synod of Whitby was a pivotal moment in the history of the Anglo-Saxon Church. It resolved a dispute between the Roman and Celtic Christian traditions, most notably over the calculation of Easter. The decision at Whitby to adopt Roman practices marked a turning point, allowing the Roman Church to establish a more organized and permanent influence across England. The role of Pope Gregory I. The conversion of the Anglo-Saxons was often attributed to Pope Gregory I, known as the Apostle of the English, who sent Augustine to lead the Christian mission. However, the Celtic mission, led by figures like Aidan and Columba, had a lasting impact, especially in areas like Northumbria and Scotland. Despite the later Roman dominance, the Celtic Church contributed significantly to early Anglo-Saxon scholarship and religious life. The Golden Age of Bede and Anglo-Saxon scholarship. Influences on Anglo-Saxon scholarship. By the time of Augustine's landing in 597, England was already beginning to thrive in the realm of scholarship. This intellectual renaissance was driven by a combination of influences. Irish influence. Ireland had avoided much of the cultural decay caused by the barbarian invasions, and its religious and educational traditions played a significant role in shaping Anglo-Saxon scholarship. Mediterranean influence. The Mediterranean intellectual heritage reached England through key figures such as Archbishop Theodore and his companion Abbot Adrian, both of whom brought advanced learning to Canterbury in the 7th century. Under the leadership of Theodore and Adrian, Canterbury became a renowned center of learning. Students trained there spread this knowledge throughout England. One of the most famous of these students was Aldhelm, who had studied under Maildub, the Irish founder of Malmesbury. Under Aldhelm's guidance, Malmesbury grew into a leading centre of scholarship. His works, both in Latin verse and prose, demonstrated his deep familiarity with Latin authors and his adoption of the ornate Celtic style. As a result, the concept of a liberal education became more accessible, particularly at monasteries in West Saxon territories such as Nursling and Wimborne. Northumbria, the heart of scholarship. The finest centre of learning in this golden age was Northumbria. Here, Celtic and classical influences merged, as both missionaries brought books from Ireland, and many Englishmen travelled there for study. Key figures like Benedict Biscop were instrumental in fostering scholarship. After his travels to Rome, Benedict returned with Theodore in 668 to 669. He spent time in Canterbury before founding the monasteries at Wearmouth, 674, and Jarrow, 682, where Bede would spend his life. Under the leadership of Benedict and Ceolfrith, abbot of Jarrow, many important texts were brought from the continent and added to the library at Jarrow, where Bede had access to these scholarly works. Bede, a monumental figure in history and theology. Bede, circa 672 to 735, is often regarded as one of the greatest historians of the early medieval period. His contributions to scholarship, particularly in history and theology, were profound, and his works remained influential throughout the Middle Ages. However, Bede was not alone in his endeavours. Other monasteries in Northumbria, such as those at Lindisfarne, Whitby, and Ripon, also contributed to the production of religious texts, including saints' lives. Bede himself was in contact with learned scholars not only in Northumbria, but also in London and East Anglia, reflecting the wide-reaching intellectual network of the time. Religious poetry and the influence of secular traditions. During this period, religious poetry emerged that was often composed using the same diction and techniques as earlier secular poetry in the vernacular. One of the most famous works from this time is Beowulf, often considered the greatest Old English poem. While its exact dating remains uncertain, it is sometimes placed within this golden age of Anglo-Saxon scholarship. Artistic flourishing. The Hiberno-Saxon style. The period also witnessed a vibrant artistic culture, combining both native Anglo-Saxon elements and influences from Ireland and the Mediterranean. The Hiberno-Saxon style of manuscript illumination emerged, with masterpieces like the Lindisfarne Gospels, which featured intricate patterns and classical motifs. Stone churches were built by masons from Gaul and Rome, and stone monuments with figure sculpture and vine scroll patterns were erected in Northumbria. Churches were adorned with precious objects, some of which were imported, while others were crafted locally by skilled Anglo-Saxon metalworkers. International connections and the Sutton Hoo discovery. The Anglo-Saxons were not isolated. They maintained contacts with Scandinavia, the Byzantine Empire, France, and the Mediterranean. The Sutton Hoo ship burial, discovered in 1939, is a notable example of these far-reaching connections. The burial, thought to be that of Raedwald, a Bretwalda or overlord, contains objects that showcase these international influences, further illustrating the extent of Anglo-Saxon trade and cultural exchange. Summary. The height of Anglo-Saxon civilization. The golden age of Anglo-Saxon scholarship, marked by the contributions of figures like Bede, Aldhelm, and Benedict Biscop, was shaped by a blend of Irish, Mediterranean, and native Anglo-Saxon influences. This period saw not only intellectual achievements in history, theology, and poetry but also artistic flourishing, with the emergence of Hiberno-Saxon manuscript illumination and the construction of stone churches. The Anglo-Saxons were firmly connected to the wider European and Mediterranean world, and their cultural legacy continues to be recognized, particularly in works like the Lindisfarne Gospels and the Sutton Hoo burial. The Heptarchy and the rise of Mercia. The supremacy of Northumbria and its decline. The early Northumbrian supremacy was marked by military success and territorial expansion. Northumbria's rise to political prominence began under Aethelfrith, who unified the kingdoms of Bernicia and Deira and achieved notable victories, 603. Aethelfrith defeated the Dalriadic Scots at Dexoston. 613–616. He also triumphed over the Welsh at Chester. However, Aethelfrith was eventually defeated and killed in 616 by Edwin, the exiled heir of Dara, with the help of Raedwald of East Anglia, who was then the overlord of the southern kingdoms. Edwin went on to become the dominant figure in Anglo-Saxon England, conquering much of the territory south of the River Humber, including Elmet, North Wales, Anglesey, and the Isle of Man. Despite his success, Edwin was killed in 632 at the Battle of Hatfield by Cadwallon, king of Gwynedd, and Penda, a Mercian chieftain. After Edwin's death, Oswald, son of Aethelfrith, restored Northumbria and became the overlord of lands south of the Humber. However, Mercia was emerging as a serious rival. The rise of Mercia. Mercia began as a relatively small kingdom in the northwest Midlands but gradually absorbed neighboring territories, including the Severn Valley and the Aceh, a West Saxon people, after Penda's victory in 628 at Cirencester. 641. Penda defeated and killed Oswald, thus ending Northumbrian dominance. 645–648. Penda further cemented his power by forcing Cenwalh of Wessex into exile in East Anglia. 653. Penda took control of Middle Anglia, placing his son as subking, and began to invade East Anglia, killing 3 of its kings. 654. Despite having amassed support from a wide region, including East Anglia, Penda was defeated and killed by Oswu, the successor of Oswald. Though Oswu briefly became the overlord of southern England, a Mercian revolt led by Wulfhere, son of Penda, resulted in Mercia regaining control. Mercian domination under Wulfhere. Wulfhere's reign marked the height of Mercian power, and he extended his kingdom to the southeast and south. He became overlord of Essex, including London, Surrey, and parts of the West Saxon lands along the Middle Thames. He captured the Isle of Wight and gave it to Aethelwald, the King of Sussex. However, in 674, Wulfhere's attempt to invade Northumbria ended in defeat at the hands of Esigefrith, the Northumbrian king. Shortly after this, Wulfhere died under mysterious circumstances. The decline of Northumbria and the rise of Wessex. After the defeat of Wulfhere, Esigefrith of Northumbria briefly regained control over Lindsey, modern Lincolnshire, but he was killed by the Picts in 685. With Northumbria focused on fighting the Picts in the north, Mercia consolidated its position. In the south, Wessex emerged as a potential rival to Mercia. Cadwallon of Wessex expanded his kingdom, conquering Surrey, Sussex, and the Isle of Wight, bringing Wessex closer to unifying the territories south of the River Thames. Despite this, Mercia maintained its dominance over the region, even after Cadwallon's death in 689. By the time of Wihtred of Kent's reign, 694–725, and the abdication of Ine of Wessex, 726, both kingdoms were weakened by internal struggles, which allowed Mercian kings like Aethelbald and Offa to rise to power. The Great Age of Mercia. Aethelbald's rule. Aethelbald became king of Mercia in 716 and expanded its territory significantly. By 731, Aethelbald controlled all provinces south of the River Humber, effectively becoming the overlord of southern England. Some of his charters refer to him as Rex Britanniae, or King of Britain, signaling his authority across much of England. Aethelbald ruled with little warfare until his death in 757, a reign marked by relative stability. Although Saint Boniface praised his governance, he criticized Aethelbald's immoral lifestyle and his infringement on church privileges. His reign ended tragically with his murder by members of his own household. Offa and the rise of Mercia. Offa of Mercia, who reigned from 757 to 796, stands as one of the most significant kings in Anglo-Saxon history. While he did not immediately reach the heights of his later power, his reign ultimately established Mercia as the preeminent kingdom in England south of the Humber. Offa's reign was marked by military conquests, political maneuvering, and efforts to increase Mercian influence both domestically and on the continent. Offa's political and military power. Kent and Sussex. Offa's dominance over Kent began in 764, but it was contested in the Battle of Otford in 776, where he temporarily lost control. However, he regained it by 785. He also expanded his power in Sussex and the district of Hastings. East Anglia. Offa's influence extended into East Anglia, where he used a mint to issue coins, a sign of his supremacy. Subkings and Thegns. He reduced the status of subkings, particularly in Achay and Sussex, who lost their royal titles and were instead called ealdormen. A Kentish king was referred to as Offa's the GN. Alcuin's account. The scholar Alcuin describes how Offa's rise involved considerable bloodshed to secure his son's succession, and that many fugitives fled to Charles the Great for refuge. Treaty with Charles the Great. Offa maintained a highly significant relationship with Charlemagne, Charles the Great. Charlemagne referred to Offa as his dearest brother, and sought to arrange a marriage between his son and Offa's daughter. However, Offa's refusal to marry his daughter to Charles's son unless Charles allowed one of his daughters to marry Offa's son led to a prolonged quarrel and even a trade embargo. Offa's reform and propaganda through coinage. Coinage reform. Offa's reform of coinage was modeled on that of Pippin III in 755. Coins bearing Offa's name became a hallmark of his reign, marking the first time that a king's name consistently appeared on coins. The quality and design of his coins, especially those with his portrait, became tools of propaganda, emphasizing the king's superiority to his subjects and his continental neighbors. Pope Adrian I. The Pope regarded Offa with great respect and awe, reflecting Offa's standing in both ecclesiastical and secular matters. Internal government and the Dyke. Internal administration. While details of Offa's internal government are scarce, Alcuin praised it, suggesting a well-organized and efficient rule. Offa's Dyke. One of Offa's most enduring legacies is Offa's Dyke, a massive earthwork constructed along the boundary between Mercia and Wales. The dyke not only served as a defensive measure but also symbolized Offa's power and foresight. The church and learning in Offa's time. Under Offa, Mercia also made significant strides in ecclesiastical and educational matters. Church influence. Although Northumbria remained dominant in learning, Mercia made notable contributions. Alcuin, a scholar from York who later became a key figure in the Carolingian Renaissance, had connections to Mercian intellectual life. Papal legation. 787. A landmark event was the arrival of a papal legation in 787, the first since the conversion of England. The legation drafted reform statutes accepted by the ecclesiastical provinces of Mercia and Northumbria. Offa used this opportunity to have his son consecrated as the first recorded coronation in England and to elevate Lichfield to a metropolitan see, making Mercia an ecclesiastical hub. This move, however, was unpopular, particularly with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Janebert. Lichfield as ecclesiastical center. By establishing Lichfield as the metropolitan archbishopric, Offa sought to curb the influence of Canterbury, but the move was reversed in 802 when Lichfield lost its archbishopric after tensions eased. Cultural flourishing, education and scholarship. The intellectual vibrancy of Mercia in Offa's reign may be underappreciated, but evidence suggests that schools in Mercia were important sources of scholarship, which would later contribute to Alfred the Great's learning revival. Vernacular poetry. Beowulf and the poems of Sinuulf may have been composed during this period, representing a significant cultural output in the vernacular. Offa's legacy. Offa's reign represented a peak in Mercian power and influence, both politically and culturally. His relationships with Charlemagne, his coinage reforms, his defensive measures like the Dyke, and his ecclesiastical ambitions marked him as a key figure in Anglo-Saxon history. Despite some contentious moves, such as the creation of the Lichfield Archbishopric, Offa's influence reached beyond England and shaped the trajectory of early medieval Anglo-Saxon politics and culture. The decline of Mercia and the rise of Wessex. After Offa's death in 796 and the brief reign of his son, Mercia began to lose its dominant position in Anglo-Saxon England. Although Cenwulf, Offa's successor, attempted to maintain the kingdom's power, he was unable to replicate his father's achievements. Cenwulf's struggles and external influences, revolts and decline. Cenwulf faced internal rebellions, particularly in Kent and East Anglia, which further drained Mercian power. He could not consolidate his control as Offa had, signaling the start of Mercia's decline. Charles the Great's influence. In 808, Charles the Great, Charlemagne, intervened in Northumbria, restoring Eardwulf to the throne. This was an unusual event in Anglo-Saxon history, as it showcased the direct influence of the Carolingian Empire in Anglo-Saxon affairs. Cenwulf allowed this external intervention, which further weakened Mercia's standing. The rise of Wessex and Egbert. Egbert's ascension. In 802, Egbert became king of Wessex. While there was no immediate warfare between Wessex and Mercia, Egbert began consolidating his power. He expanded Wessex's borders, conquering Cornwall and continuing Cenwulf's campaigns in Wales. The turning point 825. In 825, Egbert defeated Beornwulf of Mercia, signaling a significant shift in the balance of power. After this victory, Egbert's forces marched into Kent, where the local people accepted him as their king. By the end of the year, Egbert ruled Kent, Surrey, Sussex, and Essex, bringing much of southern England. The bending of Mercia. Beornwulf's fall. The people of East Anglia rebelled against Mercian control in 825, killing Beornwulf, marking the end of Mercia's grip on the region. Egbert as Bredwalda. In 829, Egbert became the ruler of Mercia and all lands south of the Humber, earning the title of Bredwalda, supreme ruler of the Anglo-Saxons. As chroniclers added his name to the list of such kings, alongside figures like Bede's description of past overlords. Mercia's rebellion. However, Egbert's reign as Bredwalda was short-lived. In the same year, Wiglaf, a Mercian leader, regained the throne, and Mercia returned to independence, breaking free from Wessex's control. The Viking threat and the need for unity. Viking raids. By the early 9th century, Viking raids had become a grave threat to Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Aethelwulf, Egbert's son, succeeded his father as King of Wessex in 839. Aethelwulf recognized that in order to combat the growing Viking menace, Mercia and Wessex needed to cooperate. Marriage alliances and peaceful settlements. Aethelwulf established peaceful relations with Mercia through marriage alliances and settling boundaries peacefully. This cooperation paved the way for the eventual union of the kingdoms under Alfred the Great in 886. Alfred the Great's rise. Unification. By 886, Alfred, King of Wessex, became the lord of all the English who had not fallen under Danish control. His leadership marked a critical turning point in the defense of Anglo-Saxon England against the Vikings. The earlier alliances between Mercia and Wessex laid the groundwork for this unification. Conclusion. The shift from Mercian to Wessex dominance. By the time of Aethelwulf's reign and Alfred's rise, the political landscape of England had shifted from Mercian supremacy to the rise of Wessex as the dominant force in southern England. The combination of internal struggles in Mercia, Viking invasions, and strategic marriages allowed Wessex to consolidate power and ultimately lead the defense against Viking invasions in the 9th century.